Good afternoon. I'm Michael Yapko. The purpose of the demonstration, which I have titled Hypnosis and Exploring Options, is to address one of the most common difficulties that we as clinicians are asked to treat. I think you're probably in clinical practice for about 42 seconds before somebody says to you some variation of, "I'm feeling really stuck." And so what this process is really about is a way of facilitating the possibility of weighing information, viewing information from a variety of perspectives, evolving strategies for making decisions and following through with decisions, hopefully being able to realistically anticipate consequences and evolve ways of dealing with those consequences for the decisions that we make. The thing that happens, I think, when people get quote-unquote stuck is that sometimes they literally don't know what the range of options is that is available to them. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that they know what the options are, they just don't like any of them. And sometimes when you consider what the actual structure is of a third possibility, which is the person is simply ambivalent, torn between two different choices or two different alternatives, you start to examine some of the structure of that ambivalence. Ambivalence happens to be one of the most here and now oriented experiences that there is. When the person's feeling stuck, they're feeling stuck right now. And one of the best tools for helping people get through those moments of ambivalence that can last for years is when the person has the ability to move forward in time and start to anticipate more realistically what the consequences are going to be and how those consequences can be aligned with the particular goals that they have in mind. The things that I'm going to be doing during this hypnosis session are certainly things that can be done in other modalities. You don't need hypnosis to do this. So the logical question is, why use hypnosis? One of the things I think that hypnosis is most amenable to is helping people step outside their usual frames of reference. One of the interesting things I think that happens when somebody is in the experience of hypnosis is that the external realities or the internal realities, or what I would prefer to call whatever the person's perceptual frame is, starts to become much more malleable. The borders of the frame aren't quite so rigid. And that's what allows the person to start to consider other possibilities, to start to look at things from other perspectives. And that's all I'm really intending to accomplish at this point in time. So in the same way that you might cognitively and very rationally explore with somebody what their options are and help them anticipate the consequences, this kind of a process is certainly capable of addressing those kinds of cognitive skills, and in fact will address those kinds of cognitive skills. But the idea also is to address other dimensions of the person's experience. And that's, I think, one of the things that attracts me most to hypnosis as a tool. It is multidimensional by its very nature. It has the capacity to address physiological issues, cognitive issues, behavioral issues, relational issues, historical issues, contextual issues. And when we use hypnosis, the idea then is to focus on whatever particular aspect of experience is going to be most conducive to helping the person ultimately reach the goal that they're trying to reach. So if you were to simply ask the question, in order for somebody to really be able to make a decision cleanly, clearly, insightfully, what frame of mind do they need to be in? And that, in a nutshell, is what this session's about. How do we build that frame of mind of being able to help this person get absorbed in that kind of an experience? Now, I came into this demonstration hour not having anybody to work with. And I was simply going to, at this moment in time, invite somebody to come up on stage. But Consuelo here has kind of beaten me to the punch with that by coming up and saying, "Do you have anybody?" I said, "No." She volunteered. Here she is. Consuelo and I have actually met on a couple of occasions, but really never had much more than a passing, how's it going kind of interaction. So this will really be the first opportunity I've had to have any kind of in-depth conversation with her or find out a little bit about what her concerns are. And so with that as the introduction to what this session's about, I will now turn my attention to Consuelo and get started with doing this hypnosis session for the purpose of exploring options. Okay. Hi, Consuelo.
Hi.
Can you provide a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes. Well, first of all, I am Italian, and I live and work in Milano. I have very kind of jobs. I teach in the university. I train managers about communication, and I am a psychotherapist too, using hypnosis. And I'm here because I'd like to spend less time in working and more time in writing. I'd like to write, and I think that you are the most important person now to help me in this. I'm stuck in writing, and I'd like to express myself writing essays or even a book.
Really?
Yes, this is the reason why I'm here.
Okay, and specifically what you would like to be able to do in this session then is what?
To not to be stuck and to have more options, to understand better what I'd like to do in my professional life.
Okay. Now, as you have been considering this kind of change in your professional focus to include writing, what are the kinds of things that you have become aware of as obstacles or things that seem to be holding you back?
Yes, the obstacles are the time that I spend in working. I don't say no when some work is coming. I say yes, thanks. So I don't have time to work, to write.
Mm-hmm. How do you decide which things you're going to choose to do?
Oh. I don't know. Maybe depends on if the thing that are offering me is challenging, is new, is something that give me the opportunity to learn something new in order to teach this new thing.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that in the short run then, what you'll choose to do is based on what's going to be interesting to you at that point in time.
Yes.
But by making that choice, sometimes it interferes with your ability to do other things that may take longer.
Yes, this is short time. Yes, you're right.
Okay. Now, let me divert my attention from you for one second and point something out to the group. Part of what I'm interested in, of course, in exploring options is how people go about making decisions. Not what the specific decisions are so much, but how they go about making decisions. See, in many ways it's the equivalent of when people ask a question like, what is the best car to buy? Best for what? For speed? For looks? For endurance? For comfort? For resale? And part of where people get stuck in the frame that they're in, the perceptual frame that they're now experiencing as being too rigid, is when they're using a set of criteria to make decisions that aren't really helpful with what they're trying to accomplish. Now you'll notice in asking Consuelo the question, how do you decide what you're going to do, took her a moment, but then she was able to say it's based on what she finds challenging at the moment. And so part of what I'd like to be able to do in this hypnosis session then is provide some other possible ways of making those same kinds of decisions about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned, of course, that you have been trained in hypnosis, use hypnosis. This is something that you're already familiar with in terms of your own experience. Okay. That being the case then what I'd like to do is begin. So orient yourself in whatever way you want to or need to. Use your experience now in your own behalf to help yourself start to develop the kind of internal focus that I know you have experienced at other times that you've done hypnosis. And being able to use your background of having worked with hypnosis, having experienced hypnosis. I think you already know what the experience is like for you. How you feel as you start to experience yourself getting more internally absorbed. And of course, you also know that as the outside world goes about its business, that you can still be aware. But there's a very comfortable distance. A very comfortable distance between what's out there and what's inside. And out of all the different possible focal points, all the different things that you could notice, I really don't know what you'll choose to notice. Whether you'll focus on something external that passes through your awareness, or whether you'll focus on something internal, perhaps a thought or a particular feeling. Certainly you get to choose. Whether it's a particular physical sensation, all I know is that there is a number of possibilities, each valuable in its own way. And when you take the time, the way that you are now, to start to notice the different aspects of your own experience, can make it really easy for you, surprisingly easy. To explore that very strong relationship between the choices that you make in this moment and the eventual possibilities that unfold. Certainly you know how much planning goes into organizing a trip to come to a meeting such as this. And you've come a very long way. And it really wasn't a last-minute decision in the literal sense. I know that there are some people who find it astounding, even puzzling, why someone would travel so far. I've had people ask me why I go to other countries when America has so much. And as someone who travels, as you obviously do, you already know that the way that things are done in Milano aren't quite the same as they are in San Francisco. And you can recognize at a very deep level that wherever you go, you have the beliefs, the experiences, the values, the perspectives of someone from Italy. Just as I know that wherever I go, I have an American frame of reference. And to be able to step outside that frame of reference to experience. Different ways of looking at food, relationships, manners of dress. And each country that you travel to creates different options and ways of living. You already know that, Consuelo. But one of the things that you start to discover is that the choices each carry a result. There are things that you want to be able to say, things that you want to be able to do. Now I can describe an experience to you. And at first you might even wonder why I'm talking about this right here and right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if at a much deeper level you understood something that later you might talk about or might write about. Now, I don't know what it's like in the hypnosis trainings that you do. But one of the questions I get asked all the time is, where do you get the metaphors from? And the way that I answer that, even in the things that I've written, is that when you're living life, the messages are everywhere. So even earlier today, I was standing in line, waiting to get lunch. Really nothing particularly special about that experience until you start to notice. And I started to notice that someone stepped into the line a few people ahead of me and turned and said to the person that they just cut in front of with a great deal of charm, "I'm sorry, but I'm really in a hurry. Do you mind?" And didn't even wait for an answer. Now those are the little spontaneous experiments. Because the woman that he cut in front of who was considerably more charming than he was, said, "Then you can just hurry to the back of the line." Now, when that interaction happened, I really didn't know that I'd be telling you about it just a few hours later. And now that I've told you about it, you have an opportunity to perhaps consider that there's a deeper meaning than just a lunch line story. You might choose to consider it as an interesting observation about people. Or you might choose to think about it differently. And then at a whole nother level, you can wonder, what does that have to do with writing? But now there's a whole nother thing that I'd like to describe to you. Now, I don't know if this whole episode made its way onto the Italian television or into the Italian newspapers. But a very interesting thing happened about 6 months ago in the life of Hillary Clinton, the president's wife. Because she was working with someone who invited her to close her eyes and to think about a particular problem that she was having. And she was invited to think about how someone very famous and how someone very inspirational might talk to her about that very problem. And she chose several different, very important people from American history and world history. She chose Gandhi. She chose Eleanor Roosevelt. She chose Jesus. Now, I don't know who you would choose, Consuelo. Who you think of as having a very different viewpoint. That could tell you something that would really make a difference. Who you would choose, what that person would tell you. is an interesting experience. Based on a very real belief that people know more than they sometimes realize. But it would certainly be an interesting thing to ask a writer how she makes the time to write. Or how anybody does anything. But even now, as you're sitting here, you might have noticed, as I have, shifts that have taken place in your breathing, in the muscle tone of your face. And so in just a moment, Consuelo, I'm going to ask you to describe for me out loud what you're aware of at this moment. And you'll find that you can describe to me quite easily, quite effortlessly. And that even as you describe your experience, it can deepen your involvement. And so if you would now describe for me what you're aware of.
Yeah. When you told me about my travel, I went immediately in the place where I am born. It is in a very small town in Sardinia. And then I've seen all my houses in Sardinia, and then in Milan, and then I'm here. And I was comparing the Italian culture and my family, my friends, and the American culture and this. And I heard my mother telling me, "You want too much, slow down." And then when you were telling me about the writers, the first one was you, and then I said, no, I want a woman. I didn't find a woman. It was Christa Wolf, but I don't write these kind of things. And then I have chosen Calvino, especially because he was very fond of American culture, and because of his last book about lightness in American Lectures. It's a chapter about lightness, and this was what.
Okay. All right. Go back inside now. That's right. And start to reabsorb yourself. Immerse yourself again. And notice how quickly and how easily you can begin to recapture that very deep sense of awareness. And what you've just described so beautifully is What's your direct experience? Of knowing, really knowing, that culture represents a choice. Of being able to choose what you most appreciate and value in your culture, my culture, any culture. And what you start to realize when you think about it is that in a way each human being is a culture, all her own, all his own. Your own language, your own customs, your own way of viewing things. And when you get to choose which aspects of your culture you want to continue to honor and make good use of, and which aspects of the way things have been you're ready to let evolve and change and grow. But there's one other thing that I think would be really deeply helpful. That in the same way, someone might ask, which is the best car to buy? And you've heard my answer. Best for what? Then you might ask, what's the best use of my time? And I think you can safely predict how I'd answer. And so you can make some choices according to what feels best, and some choices according to what's the safest and least threatening, and some choices based on what the goal is. And some choices according to what will get the most approval. And so out of all the different ways there are to choose, I wonder if you're now much more aware of which path of choice will help you get things written. know, I don't know that I would say this all the time, Consuelo. But every once in a while, it's not a bad idea to listen to Mom. Now, out of all the things that I've talked about, from lunch lines to houses in Sardinia, I wonder which things you'll bring back. That can stay with you now and be with you the next time and each next time. You're at that point of choosing to do something that's challenging now, or choosing to do something that you'll be able to hold in your hands later. Take whatever time you want to or need to, Consuelo, to process your thoughts, and to bring this experience to a comfortable close. And when you feel like you're ready to and want to, you can start the process of reorienting yourself, bringing yourself back. Take your time. And when you're ready, you can fully reorient yourself and allow your eyes to open. Hi.
Hi. Well, may I say something?
Please.
In the last 4 years, I bought 2 houses, one for me and one for my son. Now I don't need anymore to work so hard, so I can spend my time in different ways instead of, yes, I think that now that I have accomplished this very important task for me and for my son, now I'm free.
You know, people will keep presenting things to you to do that are very interesting and challenging.
What did you say?
I said people will keep presenting things to you to do that are interesting and challenging.
Yes, I think so. Well, maybe I can say no. Maybe, I don't know. But yes, depends on if, yes, I can say no. No, thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other comments that you'd like to offer about the experience?
No, it was very moving for me, especially in the first part.
Mm-hmm.
The second part was very exciting, and there was, yes.
Nice.
I think some things changed.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Consuelo. Would you be willing to address questions from the group?
Yes.
Assuming that there are questions from the group.
Okay.
Let me open it up now to whatever questions or observations that you might have, either for Consuelo or for me. Are there questions? Yes?
I have a question about where she sort of came out of the trance.
Yes.
Maybe you could comment on that.
Let me repeat the question first, please. The question was in reference to the point at which Consuelo first came out of hypnosis, opened her eyes, and started to describe her experience. The question was, did she do that in essence because she thought that that's what I had instructed her to do?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was your instruction.
She thought that was my instruction. Okay. Now, obviously, as you know, that wasn't my instruction.
Oh.
But as you can tell, it really didn't matter. You know, part of utilization in hypnosis is whatever the person does is fine. Just use it. As you can tell, it wasn't disruptive in any way, and I just went with it. But I was, I guess, with you. I was a little surprised that she sat up, opened her eyes, and started talking. Okay, so let's talk, and now go back in. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Okay, other question back there?
You gave a story about God breaking the law.
Yes. Okay. All right, let me try and summarize the question. The question was in reference to the metaphor that I used about the fellow who tried to cut into the lunch line and the woman being assertive enough to say, if you're in such a hurry, you can hurry to the back of the line. And the question was, because I offered that story as an indirect way of suggesting to Consuelo that she could be assertive, would I ever then give her a more conscious or direct interpretation that says something to her about her ability to consciously and deliberately assert herself? Now, it is always a matter of clinical judgment about whether or not you're going to give the person some conscious interpretation or some conscious meaning about your metaphors. Given that Consuelo is herself an experienced hypnotist, given that these are tools that I'm assuming she's working with, then she already has, as I would guess, that particular aspect of what makes metaphors a powerful tool potentially, namely the search for relevance. And so there are some individuals that you give them an idea and they run with it. There are other people, you give them an idea and it's basically like abandoning a baby at a doorstep. They don't pick it up, they don't run with it, they don't think about it. Those are the individuals that you may want to be more consciously and deliberately purposeful about giving the person the meaning of what you're talking about. There's no law against telling people what the purpose of the story was. I know that there are people that say, well, trust your unconscious and let the person derive their own meaning. But that presupposes the person is going to derive meaning. Not everyone does. But in this particular case, working with Consuelo, my assumption was that this is what she would derive from it. Now I had the chance to test that assumption by asking her to then describe what's going on in there. That's when I get to find out, is she understanding? Is she getting something from this? If she had told me during that interaction that, gee, that was an interesting story, but so, then I would have done more to structure it so that it would have been more meaningful and more directly useful. Okay. Other questions? Yes?
Yes.
Whatever you decide to do, you are a powerful and strong woman, and thank you very much for helping Dr. Yapko provide us with a moving hypnotic demonstration.
Thank you.
Let me repeat the comment. The comment to Consuelo was a very flattering one of telling her that she is a strong woman and a capable woman, and a nice framing of saying thanks to Consuelo for giving me the opportunity to do a hypnosis session that was helpful. Okay, other questions about the process itself? It's hard to see if there are any other hands up here. Yes. The question has to do with when I was introducing different pieces of information that her trance experience would lighten, and at other times her trance experience would deepen. And the reality is that that process of fluctuation occurs throughout any trance process. It's why in many ways there's an absurdity to going deeper, 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 because nobody really just goes deeper, deeper, deeper. So you would expect those kinds of fluctuations in the degree of involvement. Some things I talk about that certainly encourage a more cognitive appraisal, those are the times when she's going to be lightening the trance, but it doesn't diminish the value of the trance experience because it's that precise cognitive connection I'm going after. So there isn't a correlation between the depth of the hypnotic experience and the value of the hypnotic experience. It's not as if, in other words, the deeper the trance, the more beneficial the trance. So really, I'm offering all kinds of levels of experience to her and wanting each level in some way to be meaningful. Okay. Next question.
I was wondering what technical point you had in mind by making the suggestion that it's not always a bad thing to listen to your mother. And I was wondering, Consuelo, what your response was when you gave the same smile with the trance that you have there now.
Okay, the question has to do with what was the technical point behind me saying that sometimes it's pretty valuable to listen to mom. In the largest sense, one of the choices that you want people to have available to them is to have the ability to selectively listen to people. You know, when you're growing up, there's the absolute message of always listen to mom, and then when you go through the typical adolescent rebelliousness, you don't ever want to listen to mom. And it's, I think, the reason behind the witticism that as you get older, your parents start to seem smarter and smarter to you. That I certainly wanted to be able to say that there are occasions when mom is correct. And of course, the only context that she could access for what I could possibly mean was the one that she gave me, in which mother said to her, you know, it's okay to say no, or you're trying to do too much. So given that that was the only quote from mother, my assumption was that that was the frame of reference that she was going to immediately go to as soon as I mentioned what mother said without having to specify it. Okay? If you want to comment on
Yes.
what your experience was as I said that.
Yes, well, my mother died 3 years ago, and I have her inside me, and she's helping me very much.
Okay. And when I said that to you about listening to your mother,
Yes.
did you immediately know what I was talking
Yes.
about? Okay,
Yes.
that's the technical point, is that people will inevitably use their frame of reference to make meaning, and the only frame of reference that we shared about mother was, you know, don't try and do too much. Okay. Any other questions? It's hard to see. No other questions? One more. Yes. The question had to do with how Consuelo described her two different emotional experiences based on the different parts of the process. How the first part she described herself as being moved, and in the second part she described herself as being excited. It is often the case in working with people that they work through one feeling to get to another. In other words, you know, that they want to do something, they're ambivalent about it, they have a lot of fear about it. So you work them through the fear, and they're feeling the fear, and the fear is very present. But then as you work the person through it and the fear starts to subside, now comes the enthusiasm for it. So it's really just a developmental process of how the feelings start to catch up to what the larger goal is. So it's actually, in that regard, pretty typical. Okay. Okay. I don't see any other hands up, and so, one more?
During the process, you communicated with her.
Yes.
Do you frequently?
The question was, is it common for me to interact with the person in hypnosis? And the answer is absolutely. You see, one of the differences between more traditional hypnosis and what has come to be known as the utilization approach or Ericksonian hypnosis is the emphasis on the interactional aspect. With traditional hypnosis, you have the person sit there, eyes closed, you say a lot of things, offer them a lot of suggestions, and basically you throw all these suggestions at the person and just hope that something sticks. But you never really know what the person's thinking, how the person's absorbing what you're saying, and no matter how sensitive you are, no matter how perceptive you are, you're not a mind reader. So really the only way I have of knowing is this person getting anything out of this session is by asking. And so it is very typical for me to ask for feedback, either verbally, such as I did with Consuelo, when you need more complex kinds of responses, or you can ask non-verbally, simply with finger signals or a head nod, if all you need is a yes or no answer. Okay? Okay. Well, I would like to say thank you to you, Consuelo, very much for volunteering. Appreciate that very much. And I'd like to thank you for coming to the demonstration.